Creative Katie here, Karen Burchill, with another mixed media tidbit and tip. And today we're working on our color mediums, and it has coffee or tea stained paper or embellishments. So I pulled out a bunch of embellishments, and I have my coffee, but I think I'm going to use, for the sake of ease, instant coffee. So you can, for this, you can take the coffee. Now this is Pert coffee, and I tried it out, and my Keurig coffee, and it didn't quite do the trick. So what I'm just going to do is just add some instant coffee to this. I'm going to let that, and you can play with it. Now there are videos on how to do that, so you can Google on YouTube, and they make a tub, and they do like whole journals if they're doing the vintage thing. It's not what I'm going to do, so it's going to be for a little one. This is definitely a sample, but you can definitely pull out a Rubbermaid tote and put in tons of this to get strong. So while that's just mixing up, I want to show you a page that I did recently with using, it was the instant coffee, and I did not, and this is it, and you can see the coffee stains on it. So very much the vintage, old kind of look. So let's get started. So I have a bunch of materials here, and we're just going to try different ones and see. Now, anytime you're putting paper into water, you know, it's going to have some dry time. So this is just a doily, because I'm thinking that would be a good thing to have vintage. So even just putting it in and taking it out is, whoops, and there you go. See, it just fell apart. So what I would try to do instead of that, let's just do some troubleshooting right here. So if that's falling apart, instead of dipping it into water, what would happen if we just didn't touch it with the water and just did this? Or what I'm more apt to do, spray it, you know, so, and again, very, very fragile. So I'm not sure, you know, you have to play with it, but I like the model look. So if you're very careful with it and taking time. So let's do something more substantial. I've got a book paper here. So I think I'm just going to spray it with water, because inevitably I'm going to be just using small amounts of. Now be warned, if you're using coffee, it will continue to smell like coffee. That just fell apart there. So, you know, if you don't want that in your journal, don't do this technique. So there we go. Do some splattering. And some dripping, so you can get some very, very nice effects. So let's continue on. I'm thinking that some of my napkins might be quite nice if done. And I'm going to leave it together. I'm not going to separate it at this point because I want it to be a little stronger. Now, if I was doing this one piece, I wouldn't be lifting it. I would probably dry it where it stood, where it sits. And this napkin I love, but in my mind it needed to have the sepia tone. So, you know, so a combination of brushing it on, pre-done, and just the granules. I like that, the grungy, extra grunginess of it. So we'll just set that aside and let that dry. Deli paper, how does that work? I'm just going to use this up combination. If you want your font. Now you can buy sprays. I have a sepia spray and it's my most used, one of my most used sprays. But you know, there's a cost to that. Whereas for coffee, it's a little bit minimal. You can buy the cheapest, you know, coffee at the dollar store. So we'll see. And you can play around and not do entire pages. I have some embellishments here. I'm just gonna soak that. And see, if you're going to do it, to do a whole bunch of things and then dry them, and then they're ready the day that you decide to use them on your pages. Lace. I have some white lace, but what if I want it more vintagey? Now, can you do this with paint? Absolutely. Coffee filters. I love the texture that you get putting coffee filters on. Tissue paper would also work to get vintage. Very substantial. It didn't fall apart like the doily did. Music papers. Mine is already quite, it's aged the old-fashioned way. I think it's from 1920. I picked it up at our local thrift store. So it's already quite yellow and brittle and lovely in that way. But we can add to it. And you can do more than one layer. You know, you can come back and add more if that works for you. What about magazine cutouts, letters? Can you do something with that? So let's just see. So, get that. And, you know, I found some embellishments that I have. Little cameos, and they're stark, stark, stark white. So, if I don't want them white, if I want them more vintage looking, so it's just a matter of playing with what you have. Now this is just regular printer paper, so it gets pretty fragile. I had wet it earlier, just trying to use the regular kind of brewed coffee. And I definitely would use the instant. You just get a container of it downstairs or wherever your studio is, and away you go. So I'm going to dry all these and come back to show you what they look like when they're dry. As I'm drying it, I notice, you know, some of the time you have the little blobs that are left from, they're not really completely dissolved coffee granules. If you don't like that, you can just, I've been taking just a baby wipe and kind of getting rid of the residual bits. But I really like the stained effect. So there's the coffee filter. It's not quite dry. The music paper, can you hear that loveliness? It just had turned it. So there's part of the napkin, the underlying part of the napkin, and I like how it's all there. And they all have that lovely crunch, and I really like, you know, the imperfectness of that and stuff. So there's the deli paper, and here I can just, you know, even afterwards you can manipulate it. It will be water soluble, so if you're putting stuff on top of it, you may have to seal it. So if I was doing the embellishment, I would seal it here and then glue it on afterwards, because it will spread. There's the lace, which is quite lovely. The little embellishment. So what I was talking about, before I would glue this on my page, what I would do is just put a layer of Mod Podge matte on it here, on my mat, and on both sides, and then when I put it on the paper, it wouldn't spread the brown, if that was something that I wanted to avoid. So the napkin, and again, you have kind of that imperfectness, but they're all so crispy. On the magazine paper, it's kind of glossy, so not my favorite, but you know, regular paper, printer paper. And I absolutely love my book page. I'm going to zoom out a little bit here so you can see, and you know, with the drips, I mean, you can create all sorts of things. It just, even on this side, the randomness, I wasn't even doing this side, but the randomness of it. So there's an example of things that you can do, coffee stain or tea. My recommendation is to use instant coffee, whether you make a tub of it and do a whole bunch, or whether you do it the way I did and kind of randomness. If you like the spots, you know, apply it directly on. You can see that where I was gluing these on, because there was coffee on top of the acrylic paint, it did move the paint a little bit, and I had to touch it up. So it's just something to be aware of. Coffee is non-permanent, so you just need to know that. And it does go on top of acrylic paint. So looking forward to seeing your coffee stained embellishments or pages. Thank you.